We're here outside the Sandpaper Factory in Rockland. We're about to go upstairs to the 4th floor. We're going to meet with Scott Ketcham. He is a painter who's been painting for over 30 years, and we're going to sit down and talk to him about his work, and we're going to talk about art in general and what it takes to be an artist. Here on Passive Wrappings with Steven Saragian.
I mean, there's a disturbing aspect that some people find actually fairly disturbing. Like, for instance, is her head attached to her body or not? You're not sure. You're left. It could theoretically be, and it certainly was. I don't use headless models usually. They don't last too long. But, or something like this. Here's a woman holding a baby, but that's no way to hold a baby. Is she murdering her child? What is this giant head doing here, or this giant egg shape here? So I introduce other elements, other textures, textures that are not normally associated with the body.
So Scott, we're here, we're in your studio. You've been here for 10 years. Now you've been a working painter primarily as an artist for, how long, over 30 years now?
Yeah, it's at least over 30 years. Since I graduated from college.
You went to college out in West Mass, right?
I went to Williams, and that was 1980. I graduated in 1980. In my 20s, I really didn't know what I was going to do. I knew I was going to be an artist. I didn't know what kind of an artist. I was kind of confused by art back at that time, because I had originally been trained as an impressionist. That's a very old school kind of painting. That's 150 years old. And, of course, they were pressing us with conceptual art when I was in school in the late 1970s. So I really just didn't know which way was up. I had to really kind of think through some things in my 20s. So I think of my 20s as sort of a dark decade where I went didn't know exactly what I was going to do, what art was anymore. But I got out of that. And since then, since my 30s, I've been working, as an artist. I haven't been supporting myself as an artist. I've supported myself doing other things. I've been a church choir director. I've worked for cabinet makers and picture framers and art movers and all sorts of crazy little jobs just so I could support myself doing my art, which is the thing that I love to do.
So what made you, obviously it wasn't the money then, that wasn't the motivation to become an artist.
No.
So let's go way back. What's the earliest point where you sort of think of yourself as an artist?
Probably when I was 13. I was also interested in biology, so I was thinking of being a biologist or a naturalist back then. But at 13, I took a class with an impressionist painter out in Western Mass in Lenox. His name was William Schultz. He's now dead, but he's the founder of the Impressionist Society of America. He was a wonderful, inspirational teacher, and after just a few weeks of studying with him, I knew what I wanted to do. I knew I wanted to paint. Eventually, I went on to not only be his student, but to be a monitor in the school. A monitor is anyone from taking out the garbage to instructing beginning pupils. So I was starting to teach art when I was 16 years old. People old enough to be my grandparents. It was a great thing for me to learn. I had to get out of my shell. I was very much in my shell at that time, very kind of introverted. I had to learn how to talk to people. Art's a sensitive thing to talk about. Everyone's sort of naked. Everyone is sort of exposed. When you do something on a canvas and somebody comes over and criticizes it, it's naturally a kind of a tense situation. So at a young age, I learned how to deal with that. And now I'm teaching, of course, full-time at Massasoit. So I'm using a lot of the things I learned when I was 16 years old. So I think that's what it was. There's something about painting that really called my name, something sensuous. It called to a part of me that's more intuitive than science would have been. I think probably my attraction to science was mostly to nature, not so much to the scientific process. I think I wouldn't have done well because my math isn't the best that a scientist needs it to be. So I think this has really been a very, very good fit for me, and I'm glad I've taken this life. So I've never made a lot of money at it. I've never become rich, but I've never been poor either. I've never been on any kind of assistance, even though I sent a very sad tax return to the IRS once, and they sent back a sympathy letter saying, you may be entitled to some assistance. I think it's pretty good if you can get a sympathy letter from the IRS. But really, I was doing okay. I even could pay for my own health insurance, which of course puts me ahead of 30, 40, 50 million Americans. Right? So I've always done okay. I've just kept my overhead very low. Don't have any kids. That keeps the overhead quite a bit lower. And lived within my means. And eventually, right now, I have a full-time job, of course, with a salary and benefits. That didn't happen until I was 50 years old, is when I became a full-time college professor. So I figure I had a midlife crisis that went the opposite way. Instead of getting on a Harley Davidson and riding into the sunset, I actually got a job with an office, with a title, sick days, and a salary. And that's where
So your midlife crisis was getting a stable job.
Was going straight. Instead, I'm going the other way, raising hell and riding off into the sunset with a chick half my age or something like that. So I look upon it as a reverse midlife crisis. I actually went straight. But I still, the great thing about being a college professor is that there is a ton of freedom. There's a ton of freedom in the classroom. It's called academic freedom. They get good people, and then you say, okay, teach what you believe should be taught to young students. And the other thing that's great about it is that it affords me a lot of time to work at my career. And so it's a pretty good balance for me. And I love working with the students. I learn a lot from them, and I get a lot of inspiration from my students. Their energy, youthful energy, and optimism, and everything like that. It makes me a better artist. I feed off of it, to tell you the truth. Most good teachers, in fact, do feed off of their students' energy as much. They get as much as they receive from their students. So
now I know because I actually took some drawing classes with you, and thank you. You're too kind, really. But there is a real fast-paced energy to your classes. Mm-hmm. There's a lot of movement. I know when you get into the second half of the drawing classes, you bring live models,
right? And
so what do you think? Because these classes are usually around 20 to 30 people, and it's you moving around a lot with the students. And do you think, how does that compare to how you learned? Do you think that that's sort of real fast-paced energy? And because I remember we would do sketches where there'd be you'd have 10 to 30 seconds on some of them, right, to capture the figure of it. Right. So do you do that a lot still now, today?
I still teach that way. I've studied under a number of really good teachers, some of whom were very different from each other. A lot of that style came from another artist I studied with in the early 90s, Andrew McMillan, who is also now dead. But he ran a sort of fast-paced art class. I don't know. It's what I got used to myself as a student. I loved those classes where you could really immerse. You didn't have time to think. You didn't have time for your mind to wander. You were on task, drawing. And my best, the times when I advanced the most were the times where I had intensive kind of classes. So I guess that's why I run an intensive class. I did have a class in college that was, it was 1 month, 5 days a week, 8 hours a day, figure drawing. That's all it was. Draw. And I learned a ton. I learned, in a way, you teach yourself how to do it because you're doing it repetitively and you're doing it again and again and again. I also had another class in the summer times where we were drawing from the model 7 hours a day for 3 weeks straight, 5 days a week. And I advanced a ton. So that's why I push the classes that way. No one has time to think. No one has time to think about anything else but draw. And there's something about having a live model. The model takes a pose. You've got to be there. You've got to draw it.
Something about that approach, I think, it does stop you from being overly critical and overly analyzing.
Right.
Because
you're going to do some bad drawings. Yeah. And you're going to go, oh my, I just did a bad drawing. I really am a bad artist. You're going to go into that place. You don't have time. You turn the page and you do it again. It's probably a little bit like If you're learning to do something as difficult as shoot a basketball, you can't go to pieces just because you miss one. You shoot it again. There's always another shot that you can take. There's always another piece of paper. There's always another pose. There's always another drawing you can make. And so you accept that failure is going to be part of the process, that you're going to do some bad drawings. I'll tell you right now, I do plenty of bad drawings and bad paintings. You won't see them on the walls because I won't show them to you. But they're here. And I just accept that that's part of it. If you put anything at risk at all, you are going to have some failures, and you just don't go to pieces with it. Matter of fact, if you listen to what like star athletes, LeBron James and people like that, what they talk about when they're talking about their athletic success, they're all extremely acquainted with failure. You know, they're very at home with failure. And that doesn't mean you like failing. I don't like doing bad drawings. I don't like doing bad paintings. But no one does. But you accept that bad drawings, stumbles, you're going to scrape your knee, you're going to fall every now and then. You accept that that's part of it. And that's so if there's no time to think and no time to mull over how bad you are, you don't worry about it. And I think that's what holds a lot of students back.
You know, I was just thinking that. That's what I saw a lot of, even just as a student. I haven't been a professor before. But people would get really overly critical about certain things they were doing, when really what they need to is just keep running through the process, and they need to keep trying new things.
Exactly.
And I think that's probably the number one thing you have to train out of people when they're going into the visual arts or into a lot of other fields also. You have to train them out of that very, this holding back that they have.
They're holding back, and they're measuring themselves. You know, you're measuring yourself against the great art that you've seen in museums or online or what have you. That's all perfect. That's the result. That's a result of a ton of different successes and failures. That's a tip of the iceberg, what you're seeing. You know, when you're looking at a great athlete on a basketball court, you're seeing really a few minutes worth of the guy's career. Those few minutes are backed up by hundreds and hundreds of hours of practice that you don't see, where the shots didn't go in, or where you tripped over something, or something didn't work right. And I totally agree. That is something you have to train out of people. Monet used to say to young painters, paint as long as you can without worrying if you're any good. So don't worry if you're any good or not. Trust that you got something to say. Trust that you're going to get there. Work your butt off to get there, and don't look back. And that's kind of the way that I approach it. I suppose that's why I do a lot of work, because I enjoy the process of doing the work. And once I have a painting that's successful, I put it up on the wall and more or less forget about it. You know, I even give them away sometimes because I know people will treat them better than I treat them. So they'll throw them into a pile. Realize I've ruined a couple of them just because I threw them into a pile because I didn't care about them anymore. It's on to the next painting.
You were more interested in the process than the actual final result for a lot of that work.
Yeah, I enjoy the process. I enjoy the immersion that I get from doing it. I enjoy the results too. I just don't really, I feel like I could sit there and admire a painting that I've done, but after a while I get a little tired of that. I want to it's the next painting. The best paintings are the paintings, in fact, that encourage you to do a new painting. A painting that encourage you to change direction, perhaps, or go and try something new, or maybe to take what that painting did well and push it further. The best paintings are paintings that don't feel like final results. They feel like they are progenitors of new and better and bigger art. Those are the paintings that most artists are really the most fond of. So some of the paintings that have this characteristic are not exactly successful. There's a flaw that would keep them from something you would show, publicly, but they've got something.
This might be part of the problem with the museum system in general, is that those aren't the sort of works that generally get displayed in spaces like that, with sort of the spaces designated as spaces for art to the general public. So the general public, that's what they think of when they think of art.
Right.
So they're not seeing a lot of the pieces that you're talking about.
Mm-hmm. There was just to go back, the Impressionists, this is in 1860, 1870. Mm-hmm. These young squirts, and it's really kind of ironic because all the major museums are now full of Impressionist paintings, but when they were young, sort of rebellious young artists, their mantra was burn the museums. They thought the museums had become these mausoleums for art, where art went to die, where once it was in the museum, no art could change. Every piece of art had to be referred against that piece in the museum. And they said, burn the museum, burn the Louvre. Of course, if they burned the Louvre, they'd be burning their own paintings nowadays. That's like part of the irony of it. There was a wonderful show at the Peabody Essex Museum, which is a very interesting museum. They had a show of Rodin the sculptor, Auguste Rodin. And they had a lot of his unfinished pieces he would never have shown. Right? So he does a little casting of something. The ridges of the seam lines of the mold are still perfectly visible. He's written on them. He's drawn a couple of things that he wants to correct. He's taken a couple of sculptures and glued them together just to mash it up, just to see, okay, what does this look like with this? And then he had also big finished sculptures for which he became very famous. But you could see the process whereby he got to those things. There was an awful lot of very offhand, almost careless-looking experiments. And so it was a wonderful show. It was a wonderful museum show because it put these things in glass cases so you could see the unfinished work of a great artist, and then you could see the finished, big, finished, robust pieces that are groundbreaking, but you could see how he got there. You could see that process. And yeah, mostly that process is invisible to most people. You don't see it. Most artists kind of hide all that stuff. They want you just to see the good stuff. So students, when I show artwork to students, I have a preference for showing not the groundbreaking masterpieces, but the unfinished works or the sketchy works that they did when they were the same age. So I'll show a Van Gogh when Van Gogh was 24 years old or so, trying to figure out how to paint. That's all he's trying to do. He's just trying to figure out, how do I use this material? It's new to me. How do I use it? Cézanne, young man, how do I use this stuff? Early Rembrandts, where it's sort of awkward, where he's not too sure of himself yet. He's not doing those miraculous things that nobody knows how he did. You're seeing that early fumbling kind of work, and to let students know it's all right that your work fumbles a little bit. Enjoy, in fact, the fumble of it. Don't worry that it has to look precious and perfect. So, yes, I agree. Students hold themselves back. They make it harder for themselves. They make art so hard. And it actually, I don't want to say it's easy because I don't want to have the gods smite me for saying it's easy here, but I will say it's more natural. Mm-hmm. It's much more natural. And as I'm getting older as a painter, I'm getting in my way less than I was when I was, in my 20s, where I got in my way all the time and made art really, really tough. So that's part of the process of learning art in ways to make it more natural for people.
Definitely. I know that you still do a lot of experimentation with the materials. We were going through earlier, and you were showing us your pieces.
Right.
And it was interesting to hear you say that you were interested in naturalism when you were younger, because your work really features heavily on the human figure. Right. And I'm wondering if there's some sort of connection between the two.
Well, actually, naturalism is another term in art making, which means it's very realistic. It pertains to the look of the surface appearance of things. So that's another way to use the word naturalism. But is
that the way that you meant to use it when you said it originally? Okay.
No, so I'm actually using it two different ways now, just to confuse everybody. The naturalism that I was thinking about when I was going to be a biologist at 13 years old is, in fact, the study of nature, going out in a boat and studying sturgeon in the Great Lakes or something like that. But I think I want nature to be in my artwork. And at the same time, I realize that in order for me to get to nature, I have to have a robust, creative interpretation of nature. So to copy nature wouldn't be enough. I could copy a realistic rendering of a person. That wouldn't be enough because it wouldn't throb with the life of that kind of nature. So I would say it probably does. I haven't really thought about that connection too much, the connection to my early thoughts about biology and my switch to art. I haven't really thought about that as a connection. There's got to be a connection somewhere. But the whole thing, I do want nature in my artwork, but I don't want a slavish imitation of nature. I want it more about my reaction and my feeling to things. Really, art is best if it's more about feeling. It's not a very good way to record facts, after all. It's not a very factual kind of thing. You paint something. A camera is much more factual. I mean, it records everything. It'll record the fly that's on the painting over there. If we fail to see it right now, we'll hone in and later we'll see that there's a fly on the painting. It records everything regardless. Art is best if it's much more interpretive and much more emotional. So my artwork is emotion-based, but it's an emotional reaction to nature, emotional reaction to the figure. I used to be an artist model myself in the early 90s. At the same time, I was a church choir director. I was also an artist model in Boston and modeled for a ton of different art classes, which also enabled me to learn how to teach art and how not to teach art. There were some very good teachers in Boston at the time, and there were some amazingly dumb teachers. Of course, some of the big private schools, which I shouldn't name, had some of the worst teachers in them. Some teachers I thought they didn't teach anything. So I want to make sure I'm never like that person. But as I was an artist model, being in contact with all these artists, I also know what it feels like to be a model. So there's a lot of empathy that has to take place. When I worked on the model, I tried to feel, I didn't wait even more, try to become the model. Try to become that person as much as I can. It's pretty much in the mind. I can feel what they're feeling, start to think what they're thinking. If I can imagine what they're thinking. So to me, the models who I use are not just bodies, not just forms in space. They're people. Each one of them, they don't not only look different, have different body types, but they think differently. They move themselves differently. And I use that when I do my artwork. You know, she always has an evil expression on her face. She's a lovely, sweet girl, but she has this evil smirk sometimes. And I love to count on it, whereas she has a very kind of quiet, serene kind of look always on her face. And so I react to those things as much as I react to the movement of body parts and so forth when I do work. So I don't know if this answers your question about the connection between nature and art. That's always a hard thing to. They seem sometimes at cross purposes and they seem sometimes right together. So I'm not really sure what the answer to that is, but it's got to be some connection with me.
It's interesting to hear this level of empathy with the models, because I think certain people, when looking at your work, there's a certain morbidity to it that a lot of people see.
Sure.
And so you're always trying to, you don't do a lot of direct figural work, even though there's a lot of focus on the figure. Well, there's some direct figural work, but a lot of it really brings in things that obviously you wouldn't see directly looking at a person. This is part of your divergence from naturalism that you were talking about.
It's in a way, it's to try to get at something that is in the inside of the person that is invisible. I mean, art is best if it makes something visible that wasn't visible before. So if I just simply recorded the surface appearance of things, then I wouldn't be really servicing art very well. I should be getting at something else. The artist Degas would say, artists don't paint what they see, they paint what they want others to see. And then he went on and made a fascinating comment. He said, drawing is knavery, trickery, and deceit. And that's a great comment. In other words, it's not about a faithful recording of the facts, but in a way, trying to get to something underneath those facts. And it may mean that you have to tell a few fibs. You may mean that you have to take what somebody looked like and change the appearance according to how your imagination sees it. So, yes, there is a certain morbidity, a certain heaviness to my work, and there is to some of my models, too. They're feeling pressure, they're feeling the weight of things, anxieties, depression even, I suppose. And sometimes that comes through with the artwork, and it's probably also my own anxieties and whatnot that come through. my own imagining of what comes through. So, but it's really, it's not about recording things. We're recording the feeling, what I think is underneath, what I think is inside the model, or inside of myself as I look at the model. Either way. But it does feel like empathy. It does feel like, I mean, even if you're doing a still life of apples, in a way you have to become an apple. As silly as that sounds, in a way you want to get so close to that apple, perceive it so closely that it feels like you are almost becoming that apple. You feel, if I'm drawing the edge of an apple, I really should feel like I'm touching the apple. Not just drawing a shape. I should feel, I'll communicate much more about the apple if I feel like I'm actually touching. And so the same thing with the models as well. That may sound a little sketchy there, but really and truly, you've got to get in there. So if the model is doing something with a twist, I got to feel that twist. I got to feel it in the paint. I got to feel it in the drawing or sculpture, whatever. It's got to feel like that twist. I got to feel a little bit of the pain of it, or the discomfort of it, or maybe the joy of it. I got to feel that. And that's, so a lot of the stuff that departs from the surface appearance of the model comes from an effort to get at this other thing, whatever that is, this invisible thing, but that's very much in the room.
Yeah, I've always had a problem with a bit of the documentary approach to painting, in that, as you were saying, the camera can do a much better job of recording that. And even though the camera can never capture really being there. Right. If you were in a landscape of a field, that's not going to be the same as filming the field, which is never going to be the same as actually being there. Right. Being there is always going to be an experience which is different. So as an artist, you have to communicate something which would be more than that, or which really comes from your experience of it and from the model's experience.
Right, exactly. Otherwise, I'm really just any sort of realistic representational, just simple representation of the model is probably just going to be just a pale imitation of nature. So you have to go at it much more emotionally, much more involvement, and not just a passive. I think that the naturalism, and now I'm using the artistic term, meaning the faithful recording of nature, the naturalism that some people do, photographic like naturalism, is really very passive. All right, I'll paint it there because I see it there. All right, there's no other reason for me to paint it. I see it, I'll paint it. There's a wrinkle, I'll paint that wrinkle. There's a shoelace, I'll paint the shoelace. What difference does it make? I'll just paint everything sort of equally. And there's no sense of the artist is involved and says, I'm painting that because that really interests me. That doesn't, but that, I'm fascinated with that. So you feel more connected not only to the model, but also to the artist with the result of that kind of work. We're living in a strange age that's sort of data-driven. You know, IT's taken over the planet pretty much, and it's all about accumulating data. So you've got an awful lot of people. It's even a problem in the science where you get mountains and mountains and mountains of data, but at some point, somebody's got to look at that data, synthesize it, and come up with something that isn't just a collection of data. It's called knowledge. And then hopefully, even a step back from that becomes wisdom. We don't emphasize this enough, I think, with young people. We want them just to collect the data. We want them to paint what they see and record what they see. And we don't want them to synthesize and have that emotional kind of charge to it, you know. So sometimes I teach observational painting and drawing, so sometimes I have to accuse myself of putting students in that place. So I always want them to draw, even if they're doing something that is faithfully from the model. I want them to put a lot of their emotional heart and soul into it as much as they can. Otherwise, art is pointless.
Well, you do have to be able to capture a certain amount physically. Right. A woman has to look like a woman to be read as a woman.
Right. There has to be. And actually, well, it depends on why. I mean, for instance, if you're studying anatomy, if you're studying anatomy as a figurative artist, you could study anatomy because it'll make your drawings look more proper and correct, and they will. But you can also study anatomy because you're trying to empathize more deeply with the I look at the work of a great Viennese artist, Egon Schiele, who died just about 100 years ago, did these wonderful drawings, and they're they pertain very specifically to the model. They have these wonderful kind of marks and rhythms that all have Latin names, but you feel like he's using that to get more deeply connected and empathize better with the model rather than just to record it more faithfully and more factually. So it depends on your attitude. Anatomy could be just about being factual, or it could be about being empathetic. You could use it. Depends on what you want to use it for. It's like any other tool. I mean, a camera, you could use a camera very emotionally, I'm sure, really. And you could use a camera just as a sort of a passive way. Just turn the camera on and record everything, no matter what. I'm sure it's the same sort of thing. It's a tool. It depends on how and why you're using it.
And I remember the first time I saw some of your work. It was back in 2011, and there was actually a faculty show at Massasoit. And I remember the work then, actually, it's interesting you mentioned Sheila here, because your work kind of reminds me of his when I first saw it.
Yeah.
And one of the pieces that I still remember now, I'm trying to recall the name of it, Adaptation or something like that. It was a piece with, it was a woman, and it was odd because I remember it was a real focus on the eyes, and the head was really, the perspective was odd, and that the head was a lot more emphasized than the rest of the body, which was sort of amorphous and sort of skinless, but it had, it still retained its figural quality to it, and that's.
Oh, I sort of remember that. Oh, that was very weird. That painting, I had it up in my studio when I was getting my MFA, and some people would walk in the room with that thing in there. I think I'm thinking about the right painting. It almost looks like a face. It looks like the body is almost made up of steaks and meat or something like that. If I recall, but the eyes were almost predatory and big.
Yes, and I remember, like, years later, I still remember that piece. It still stands out to me. I remember that better than anything else that was in the show.
I would bring it up for you, but I think that's in storage in Quincy. I think that's old news, so I haven't looked at that thing in a long, long time. But yes, you don't have to. I guess once you acquire a certain skill, and I'm not against skill. I like skill. I love my craft. And I was taught by people who respected very traditional craftsmanship. And I still do. But once you get to that point, then you realize, you could do a woman back with just a shape, almost no arms, and she just becomes this morphish, I don't know what you call it, gooey kind of form that does eventually become a face up there. And then back here, the head that sometimes people don't see, but that's really decrepit. And so you can play around with things. You don't always have to record things naturally, and still people will come to your work and see that there is a person, see that there is a human figure there. So you get to a certain point, you can experiment with how much you can sort of push the envelope. What kind of, Matisse did nudes that were bright blue. He's not an idiot. He knows nobody's blue. They weren't dead. They weren't oxygen deprived. He just thought, well, why not? Why not blue? And pull it off and make it look like a real living person, even though it's done in bright cobalt blue.
This is a big painting here, was a big centerpiece for my master's show. And basically, the only thing I could do with it right now is make it at a door, so it's actually a storage closet underneath it. What else can you do with an 8-foot by 8-foot painting? It's a big painting. It's not exactly something you could put in your house. And this painting, one of the few paintings I've ever done where the title preceded the actual work, and it's The Birth of Abraxas. Abraxas was a mythic figure, and I first encountered it in the novel Damien by Hermann Hesse. And Abraxas basically is the god of all things, light and dark, male and female, good and evil. It's sort of, Abraxas really embodies all of these things together. And the people who would follow Abraxas, and I wouldn't consider myself one of them, but the people who do believe that this God is above the Christian God of light, because he's only the God of light, and he's only male. Abraxas embraces light and dark, embraces opposites, life and death, male and female, which is really, a work in here. So you can see that there is the baby Abraxas there, female life, male death, light, dark. Abraxas is the bridge, in a way, between the two. So this was the centerpiece of my master show, which I did about 5 or 6 years ago.
You had mentioned certain people who, as professors teaching, or as instructors teaching painting or other art forms, those who you appreciate their methods and those who you think are a little less than ideal. Mm-hmm. So I'm not going to ask you to name any names or any institutions.
I don't think I could remember the names anyways.
But what characteristics are you thinking of when you think of these people?
First of all, the people that I try to emulate were people who were visibly passionate about the thing that they were teaching. Mm-hmm. They were really into it. This wasn't something that they were teaching because they were on contract to teach it. Unfortunately, for instance, with figurative work, there are a lot of people who teach figurative work who don't do figurative work. They did it in college. They did some. They know something about it. But they didn't take it that far. They didn't go that far down the road with it. So in a way, they've never really believed in it. And they've never really continued to do it. And that comes through in their teaching. So they have a sort of a pedantic way of going about teaching. They teach the things they were taught back in the day. I'm teaching the things not only that I was taught, I am drawing definitely from things, the good things that I was taught and things that I found to be useful. But I'm also teaching from the things that I discovered all on my own, hour after hour in the studio, figuring it out for myself, falling, succeeding. So in a way, I'm teaching not only from what I was taught, but from the fresh experience of my efforts.
Some of my newest work, I do a lot of my work here on this sort of makeshift easel made of pipe clamps up there. Just a piece of wallboard that I pin my work onto. These are oil paintings, but on a non-traditional medium, on a non-traditional surface that I'm painting it on. It's called Denral. It's a thin plastic sheet that's actually made for designers, but it works for oil paint as well. I put the paint on very thinly and wipe it away quite a lot with a paper towel, or sometimes I can even push it around, lift it around with a window washing squeegee. Sometimes I apply the paint with a paper towel here. So it's a non-traditional. The paint's actually very, very thin. The process is to a great degree subtractive. I'm putting a lot of paint on, and then I wipe it back to get the surfaces that I want. Sort of an unusual way. Not too many people are working on this particular material.
I think that passion is really the biggest thing, and a certain kind of humility. When I teach, one of the reasons why I want students not to fear or regret failure is because I experienced it myself. And I'm not saying I experienced it 20 years ago. I experienced it last night. I did a horrible drawing. I know what it feels like. It's fresh on my mind to know what it feels like to look at a drawing and you say to yourself, am I really an artist? Would an artist have done this thing? And you know what that feels like. So, and I also know what it feels like to soar, to have one that just takes off. I don't know where it came from. It came from some bigger place than I am, and I know what that feels like too. So I have both of those spectra to think about the draw on, and to know that the students are probably going through something very similar themselves. So the teachers that I really liked were the teachers who had that same kind of confidence, but also humility, and they were totally involved in the subject that they were teaching, totally involved in art. The teachers that when I modeled, a few of them literally sat in the corner, didn't do any instruction at all. one thing to do that with an advanced student. You could let an advanced student get into trouble and see if he can get himself out of trouble. That's something good to do with an advanced student.
When you're doing your postgraduate work, that's the sort of thing to expect.
Graduate work, yes. And
but for an undergrad,
if you're in a beginning drawing,
Yeah.
figure drawing class, and you've never drawn the figure before, you need someone there. And more than an instructor, you need a coach in your corner that's yelling out things. Think about this. Look at that. And that's the best teachers I know did that. They were more like coaches behind you rather than instructors who would evaluate you. You didn't feel so evaluated. You felt coached, encouraged, directed, but not so much evaluated. So the bad teachers are the people who either gave confusing information or they gave information that was only based on something that they themselves haven't been doing in the last, 10, 20 years of their lives, or people who did nothing at all. They just sat there and did nothing with a beginning student. So I realized that you need somebody to hold the handlebars of the bicycle for a little bit. You need that, and then you need the person to let go of the handlebars and watch you fall too. I mean, it takes a little bit of both when you're instructing people, and I found that out when I was a young kid. So the teacher I had, whom I emulated, was both encouraging and at the same time insisting that you went to a higher standard. At the same time, you never got stroked, you never got petted, you just got encouraged, and then encouraged to go on and go further. And that's the, having seen a lot of really good instructors and a lot of bad instructors, I could sort of see what works for me and what hasn't worked for me, and hope that most of my students will be somewhat similar to what I was when I was their age.
Yeah, I don't know if there's a difference between maybe students who think of themselves as budding into the visual arts and those who are taking a class perhaps because maybe they want to improve their visual acuity or they just as a hobby. I'm wondering if the students who, and maybe you could tell me from your experience, if those who are aspiring to be visual artists, maybe they're a little harder on themselves, they feel like they're being ridden, whereas I feel like people who are taking class but really don't think of themselves as being an artist don't take things personally in the same way.
I have found that teaching at Massasoit, there are a number of students who are going to be art majors and a number of students who are nursing majors. They're going into nursing or they're going into law enforcement, and they're just taking this as an elective. It might be their last semester at Massasoit. They always wanted to try some drawing or painting, so they give it a shot. I find that sometimes they can be a little bit easier to work with. Sometimes one of the things that can happen, unfortunately, in art schools, and I think art teachers need to be aware of this. When you come out of high school, you did a little bit of art. You did maybe 50 minutes or so a day at the most.
Now all of a sudden you're expected to do 8 hours a day and then homework, and it can get kind of grueling, and it can kind of take the enthusiasm and the fun out of it. So as an instructor, although I have to kind of push people and make it grueling, I never want the enthusiasm to go away. So I try to be sensitive to the fact that the enthusiasm
can wane a little bit. But I really, my first class was a class when I was 13 years old under the painter William Schultz. He gave a summer class program which, there were a handful of young adolescents who had the killer instinct who wanted to go all the way with this. And then there were a lot of older people who were doing it just for fun. And this teacher could really appeal to both people. So I've never been put out by the fact that there are people in my classes who are not going to become professional artists. I have, for instance, I've open figure drawing workshop in this room for people to come and just share the model. They're uninstructed. I draw along with everyone else. And some of the people who come are professional artists, highly trained artists. Some of them are just doing it for fun. One of the people who's been coming the longest, in fact, is a sitting Superior Court judge who loves to draw and paint, and he does so really well. But that's not his day job. He puts on his robe, and he is a judge. And then he comes here, he takes his robe off, and he draws. And so for him, it's an avocation. It's an intensive hobby, more than just a passing hobby. It's a rather absorbing hobby. And I don't care if you make any money at this or not. I never made a whole lot of money at it. I'm really delighted when people do make money at it. And I know a lot of my students at the community college don't have big safety net behind them. So they do have to think about that. Otherwise, it's homelessness. It's a scary alternative if they don't make anything. But I'm still never worried if people really, the main reason for doing it is really for the joy of making art. And then actually, I think you'll actually probably do better financially at it anyway, because you'll do art that will appeal to people a little bit more. My sales are bad because I've been lazy. When I go to my studio, I think to myself, what am I going to paint today? I never think to myself, how am I going to market my paintings? I know artists who do that. Mm-hmm. They're very good, very astute marketers. They always get themselves out there, and they devote a lot of time and energy to getting their work out in front of the public. My work stays in this little box here most of the time. It doesn't get out. I try to make it get out, but occasionally. But I don't work that hard at it, so I'm pretty lazy when it comes to that.
You're not good at marketing.
I'm terrible. I'm also whenever somebody asks me how much for a painting, I say, "Oh, $100. Is that okay?" I don't have any guts when it comes to that stuff, and I'm not a very good self-promoter. I'm rather self-effacing, and a number of artists I know are, in fact, very self-effacing. I can promote somebody else's art better than I can myself. I don't know, there's a screw loose. I don't want to say these things about myself. I don't want to talk up myself. I don't have that kind of approach, and so consequently, I don't sell much artwork. Also, I've chosen a subject. Let's face it. Most people even if they come in and they like it, they can't see it in their house. What would the neighbors think if they saw this? So it would take, it really reduces the number of people who would even dare to own a piece, even if they were to like a piece. Would they dare to put it up? Would they dare to own it? And a lot of people back away at putting up edgy artwork in their houses. So that, in a way, sort of limits any market that I might normally have.
You know, I think that the self-effacing thing is fairly common. I think you're right among people who work in the visual arts. Mm-hmm. I find I've often talked about how other people I think are better designers than I am. Not because, technically speaking, they're probably not better as far as the actual nitty-gritty of design goes, but just because I think a lot of the work that they do is more commercial, and I think it's more marketable than a lot of the work that I focus a lot of my time on. And I feel like that's, and I don't want to make it sound like if you're commercial, I don't want to make it sound like if you're doing well commercially that you're not a good artist. Right. I don't want to say that, because a lot of people naturally want to do work, which I think is the market's more open to.
Exactly. If you're doing what you love and it is marketable, more power to you. Furthermore, I mean, there are edgy artists who are showing in New York and London and what have you, and they have made their careers into something. They've managed to find the buyers internationally for their work, and their work is way edgier than mine, and they've been very good at establishing a career at the same time. So they didn't have to be a church choir director or an artist model at some point. They were actually making the work from the sale of the work. So I've kind of come around to, I used to have this sort of idea that the better the artist that you were, the less commercial you were, and that's not that cut and dry anymore. So
it's not really an equation that you can work out for these things.
An equation. It really isn't. There are some fabulous artists who are also really good marketers, and there were some great artists who, thinking about the composer Rachmaninoff, who thought that artists should promote themselves because who else is going to promote you, right? And he figured that's how Rachmaninoff can stay as a concert pianist and as a classical music composer, and not having to wait tables at the diner. And so I think to myself, had I marketed myself better, I might have
been able to do more art, perhaps. Would have worked out a little bit better. At this point, and I can market myself, I'm 59 years old, so I'm a little bit, they're looking for somebody your age. They want to get on the ground floor of something that's going to be big. I ain't on the ground floor anymore. I'm getting close to the attic. So I'm not emerging talent anymore, so people are not going to be that interested in what I'm doing. I'm a late bloomer. Pretty much really what I am. I'm a late bloomer. Thank God there's longevity in my family because I think we're all late bloomers.
So this piece behind us, it's a very large piece,
Right.
Abraxas.
Right.
You did this when you were doing your MFA work?
Yep. I did it up in Vermont. I got my master's degree at the Johnson State College from Vermont, which has this really nice program. You don't do any work at the college. The Vermont Studio Center is like a retreat for artists. It's like the MacDowell Colony. Probably not as prestigious as the MacDowell Colony, but it's basically a bunch of old mill buildings up there in this little small town.
All artists are in mill buildings. That's very important. That's something you should take away from this.
It's pretty much what it is. I mean, I met a young artist once from Switzerland, and she said that one of the problems with Switzerland is you don't have clunky old buildings that are underutilized. Switzerland had a much more, robust economy, I guess, at the time. They don't have these old, let's face it, in Massachusetts and in the United States, there are an awful lot of old manufacturing plants that are now not utilized as such anymore. So people like artists move in. So her complaint was that there were no buildings like this in Switzerland, and therefore there was no place where you could be a poor bohemian artist. But anyway, I did that up there, and there was sort of the centerpiece. Actually, I did it here, but I did it for my master's degree up there. And I got my master's degree fairly late, got it only about 5 years ago, mainly so I could remain at my job at Massasoit. To get to be a college professor, you really have to have a terminal degree. An MFA is a terminal degree in the visual arts. So I needed that to hold on to my job. But it was a good thing for me, even though I was an older student. I learned a ton from the program, and I made myself learn a ton from the program. I wanted to change. I wanted to get to be a better artist. I didn't want to just spend $30,000+ just so I could get a piece of paper, which will allow me to maintain my job at community college. I wanted to learn. I wanted to grow. So I made it. I made myself do it.
So if you had said you have an issue marketing your work. So if people want to contact you or they want to see more of your work that we haven't been able to show here, where should they go? What are the outlets?
Okay, I have a website which is a Tumblr, and it's scottketcham.com. That's SCOTTKETCHAM.com. And that is, it's a Tumblr, so the most recent work is at the top, and it's close to 600 paintings on there right now. It's all paintings that I've done in the last, definitely the last 10 years, maybe more like the last 7 or 8 years. And then you can contact me if you wish at scottwketcham@comcast.net. That's my email address, and people can contact me through that. So if you go on the Tumblr site and you can see something that you're interested in looking at, you can contact me, and I can show it to you right here.
All right. Well, I want to thank you for giving us all your insights and letting us see your work today.
Thank you for coming over.
And, I'm glad that we got to talk again today.
I am too.
All right.
Me too. Thank you very much.
So I want to thank Scott Ketcham for meeting with us today, and I hope that all of you learned something. And if you want to contact me about any artists in the area that you think should be featured here on Passive Wrappings, you can contact me at contact@findtheminddesign.com.